Now, if we're going to carry a cutting tool, a knife, we need to know how to sharpen it. A blunt knife is a screwdriver. To sharpen a knife using what we call a Japanese waterstone. I've had this soaking in the stream for a little while, and that's the stone I'm going to show you to use in a minute. But of course there are other types of sharpening stone out there. There are plenty of oil stones and various other bits and pieces. Generally speaking, this type of stone is ideal for our base camp sharpening rather than in the field. But if we sharpen our knife properly in base camp, we should very rarely need to sharpen our knife in the field. So let's look at how we use this type of tool. First thing to bear in mind, guys, is that sharpening a knife isn't some black art. There's no mysticism about it. I'm not going to go into the fine detail of sharpening stones. For the layman, all we simply need to know is the stones come in various coarsenesses or various grits, and it's the grits that we use to wear down the metal of our blade. Okay, in this instance, with this stone, it's a medium grit and a fine grit, and generally speaking, unless we abuse our knives or really damage it, that's all we need to sharpen a knife in base camp locations. I do have coarse grit stones at home, and again, as I say, I use those to do repairs onto knives, or if I buy a new knife which has a secondary bevel and I want to remove it, I'll use it for that. But generally speaking, medium and fine grits for most people will do. Okay then, to sharpen our knife, first and foremost, we place the sharpening stone on a flat surface. We start on the coarsest grit that we have to hand, in this case a medium grit. We place our knife on the sharpening stone towards us, and then we lift the handle to ensure that the bevel comes in contact with the stone, like so. Placing our fingers of our spare hand on the blade, we then push the knife along the stone at a slight angle, as if we're trying to shave off a microscopic layer of the stone itself. You'll notice as I get towards the end of the stroke, I slightly roll the blade so that I'm bringing that curvature in contact with the stone at the same time. You may also notice, depending on how good the quality of the video is, that each stroke is the same, and I'm starting to create a pattern there where the tip of my blade rolls round on the stone. Okay, to reverse the stroke, then all I do is place the knife at the other end of the stone, tilt the blade up, roll it towards myself, again rolling the blade towards the tip as I come to the end of the stone. And again, I'm getting that pattern there where the knife is coming in contact with the stone, the same place every time. Okay, that tells us that we're doing the technique correctly. Now, there is a mathematical equation to sharpening a knife. For every 3 strokes you do on one level, you times it by 3 on the next level, times it by 3 on the next level, times it by 3 on the next level. My maths is absolutely appalling, and I can never remember it. I can never remember those equations. So the technique I use is thus. Do 6 strokes on one side, reverse it, do 6 strokes on the other side. I keep that going until I'm happy that the cutting edge is starting to wear and is becoming sharp enough for me to progress. I then go down to 4 strokes. So I've taken off 2 strokes. Reverse it. Do 4 again the other way. I think I might do 5 then, but do 4 again the other way. Then, when I'm happy that's working, I know this knife's sharp anyway, so I'm not going to go through the whole motion. Then go down to 2. And do that as many times as it needs for me to be confident that the knife's sharper, getting sharper. I then go down to 1. Now when I get down to 1, what I aim to do is 10 strokes on each side of the blade, alternating. So I do 1 that way, 1 that way, all the way up until I've done 10 each way. Once I've done that, I'm pretty confident that the edge of the knife is actually getting sharp. Now what I'm aiming to do, or what I'm doing, is as I'm sharpening the edge, on the knife edge there's a bevel which looks like that. Okay, as I wear one side of the edge down, the other side will slightly overlap it. As I wear the other side of the edge down, that side will slightly overlap it. And I keep doing that until I've got to the point where the overlap is the finest I can get it. And this is what we call the wire. And it's the wire that creates the feeling of a sharp edge when we use our thumb to test the edge of a knife. Okay, because the wire is rubbing against the ridges of our thumb. And that's what we're aiming to produce in its finest possible wire that we can produce. And that's the technique that will do it. Once I'm happy that the knife's sharp enough on the medium stone, I then turn the stone over, get a little bit of water, just add a little bit more lubrication. Now here's an important fact for you as well. The lubrication we put on a sharpening stone, be it oil on an oil stone or water on a water stone, isn't there to help the knife slide across the stone. It's not technically lubrication at all. What it's there for is to carry away the particles of the metal and the particles of the stone that are being ground off during the sharpening process. It's to carry them away from the pores in the actual stone itself, to stop the stone becoming slick. Okay, so we need to make sure that we keep the stone lubricated at all times to increase the longevity of our stone, and also to ensure that our knives are sharpened properly. So turning the stone over, we now go on to the medium, on this case we now go on to the fine side, and we repeat the process completely, starting off with 6 strokes one way, then the other, down to 4, two, and then 1, alternating all the way down. So we've done that, and we're now happy that the cutting edge of our knife is nice and sharp. Interesting fact, guys, see the black gunk that's coming off the blade? Yep, this is a fine paste of metal particles and stone particles, and it's an ideal thing that we can use to clean up our knives as well. It's a very finely coarse, and it makes just a nice little paste to polish or take off any fine blemishes on our knife. Okay, so we've been through the sharpening process. We're now happy that our knife is sharp. The easiest way to test our knife for sharpness is to run it across under no pressure, just the weight of the blade itself, the back of our thumbnail. We drag the knife across the thumbnail, and if we can feel the knife biting all the way along, we know it's sharp. Any dull edges, the knife will slide across with no bite, therefore we know that we need to work on it a little bit longer to increase the edge slightly. Having got to the point where we're happy our knife is sharp, we then need to do one last thing, and that is called the strop. Having sharpened our knife on a stone, we've now created what I called the wire. The wire is now sitting on the edge of our bevel, and hopefully is very fine. If we continue to use a sharpening stone, all we'll keep doing is creating the wire, pushing it from one side to the other. So the next thing we want to do then is we want to move on to what we call the strop. Now the strop is a leather strap, or a leather belt in this case, and the idea is that the leather, being softer than the stone, very gently wraps around the end of the blade and pushes the wire backwards and forwards in the reverse of how it was done on the stone. By stropping the knife onto the blade, onto the leather, we wear the wire backwards and forwards until the wire itself falls off. This will then give us a razor sharp cutting edge that we can use for most things. Whereas with the knife we push the blade away from us and then pull it back to ourselves, with the strop we do the reverse. We drag the blade away, we drag the blade back, like so. As you can see, I'm using the full length of the strop, or as much of the strop as possible, and what I'm doing is I'm taking the knife across the strop in the reverse of the technique I was using on the stone. The bevel should run gently down the leather It shouldn't be coarse and harsh against the leather. It shouldn't sound like that, it should be a gentle whisper. And ideally we do this 25 times each side, so we would do it a total of 50 times to create a good cutting edge. Okay, but there you go. We've now covered how to select a cutting tool and how to sharpen a cutting tool. And as I said before, in the next video or in a later video, when we come on to carving techniques, we'll show you how, in more detail, to use a cutting tool safely. But remember, whenever we pick up one of these, we always pick up our first aid kit. The two are inseparable. The last point I want to cover with cutting tools is whenever we've got our knife, we've always got our sheath. When our knife's not in use, we always place it back in the sheath. This isn't to protect the knife from you, it's not to stop you getting cut, it's to protect the knife from the elements. The ground, various other things, all contain silica, and those little bits of silica will dull the edge of your cutting knife. Ignore all these films where you see mountain men sticking their knives in the ground and throwing them in trees. In a bushcraft or a survival situation, our knife is the most precious tool we have, and we treat it as such. Okay? Remember one thing, your knife in a survival situation is your life. The last thing we're going to look at today then is Sawcraft, using this type of saw, the small folding saw. Now obviously if we were going to go into the woods for a prolonged period, or we were homesteading, we'd carry a bow saw. But for general purposes, for general bushcraft, the folding saw generally does what we want it to do. Features of a folding saw, first and foremost, is the handle itself. It should be of a rubberized or a grippy type material to stop it slipping in the hand. This is ideal. It should have a lock that locks closed as well as locking open. This prevents the blade closing on our fingers when we're using it, but more importantly, if we're carrying the saw in our pack, it prevents the blade coming open in our pack. So we don't reach in the middle of the night and cut our hand, or more importantly, if the blade's open, we shove our sleeping bag in there, we go for a day's walking, and the saw itself is doing a Pac-Man all around the inside of our rucksack. In the evening, we pull out our sleeping bag, we've got 2 halves of sleeping bag. Not a good situation to be in. So, a saw that locks closed as well as open is ideal. Now, I'm going to demonstrate how to use this saw on this piece of wood. The first thing you'll notice that I'm working onto a fallen tree, and this is key. As I was saying earlier with a cutting tool, with a knife, we never dig our knives into the ground, and with a saw or an axe we never work directly onto the ground either. We always work onto a fallen tree or a stump or something along those lines to prolong the longevity of our cutting edge. Again, when our saw's not in use, we close the blade, put the blade inside the handle to keep it. The technique for using a folding saw then is very simple. Opening the blade, we select the piece of wood where we want to cut it, we place the blade onto the piece of wood, then taking our free hand, we reach past the saw and begin to cut. The idea is that our body, where we've evolved from apes, tends to pull in on itself. If we slip, our immediate instinct is to grab inwards. If I'm sawing and I slip, the saw is going to come inwards, cut my hand. By placing my hand beyond the saw, if I slip, the saw is going to go that way and my hand stays safe. Again, minimum damage, like so. This is the safest way for us to do this technique. Job done. Even a blind man can use a saw.